London's police commissioner at the time of the Westminster Bridge attack has described how he witnessed the murder of PC Keith Palmer outside Parliament. Sir Craig Mackay, who's now Deputy Commissioner at Scotland Yard but was acting head at the time, was in a car with two civilians, no protection and no radio as the attack unfolded. Our correspondent Katie Spencer reports.
He was the man in charge of Scotland Yard's response to the Westminster attack. This was Sir Craig Mackay speaking at one of the vigils that followed.
People have tried to tear this city apart with acts of terror many times before. They have never succeeded and they never will.
In the days after it happened, he was leading from the front. But in the moment of the attack itself, as the carnage happened right in front of his car, the Metropolitan Police's acting commissioner was driven away. Sir Craig had been to a meeting with Policing Minister Brandon Lewis and was about to be driven out of the Palace of Westminster when he says he heard an abnormally loud bang. That noise was Khalid Masood, who'd driven into pedestrians on Westminster Bridge, killing 4 people, and then crashed his hired car into Parliament's perimeter fence. From his car, Sir Craig saw Masood run through the gates with a butcher's knife in his hand and stab PC Keith Palmer twice. Speaking at Masood's inquest, he told a jury at the Old Bailey the attacker had one of those looks where, if they get you in that look, they would be after you. He seemed absolutely focused on getting further down and attacking anyone who was in his way. Unarmed officer PC Palmer died of his injuries. Vital seconds passed before Masood was shot by a close protection officer. Sir Craig said he'd wanted to get out in those moments following the attack itself, but his colleagues had locked the car doors because there was no protective equipment and no radios. He said, first and foremost, I was a police officer, so I went to open the door to get out. One of the PCs, quite rightfully, said, get out, make safe, go shut the door, which he did, and it was the right thing to do. That's when I thought, I've got to start putting everything we need in place. I was conscious my 2 colleagues were not police officers. If anyone had got out, the way this Masood was looking, anyone who got in his way would have been a target. As Acting Police Commissioner, Sir Craig Mackay says it was his responsibility to get on with coordinating what would happen next. But as a policeman, his critics say they fail to understand how he could leave the scene. Katie Spencer, Sky News.
An inquest has heard that the acting commissioner of the Metropolitan Police stayed in his car as an unarmed officer was stabbed during the Westminster attack because he had no protective equipment. Sir Craig Mackay was leaving the Houses of Parliament in March last year when he witnessed the murder of PC Keith Palmer. Richard Lister reports.
The moment when the Westminster attacker was shot dead. And then, 20 seconds later, a dark blue official BMW is driven out of the gates of Parliament. Inside was Sir Craig Mackay, the acting head of the Metropolitan Police, who ended up leading the force's response.
For our fallen colleague, PC Palmer.
But until his evidence today, he'd never publicly described what he himself had witnessed. By chance, when the attack started, Sir Craig was leaving a meeting at the House of Commons. His official car had nearly left Parliament when he saw Khalid Masood enter the gates and attack PC Keith Palmer. At this point, Sir Craig's car doors were locked. I saw 2 stab attempts into the torso of PC Palmer, Sir Craig told the inquest jury. 2 absolutely determined stab movements. He then saw PC Palmer run right past his car, followed by the attacker, Khalid Masood. He seemed absolutely focused on getting further down and attacking anyone that got in his way, Sir Craig said. He then heard the sound of Khalid Masood being shot by a close protection officer. Sir Craig said he tried to get out of the car, but a PC told him to shut the door, keep himself safe and leave. He was then driven away to start coordinating the Metropolitan Police response to the attack. Richard Lister, BBC News.
Now, none of us knows how he would behave in the middle of a major crisis, but there was some rather uncomfortable evidence at the Westminster inquest today. Sir Craig Mackay, who was in charge of the Metropolitan Police at the time, described how he saw one of his own officers, PC Keith Palmer, murdered in front of his eyes. But whilst others, like the MP Tobias Ellwood, strove to keep PC Palmer alive, his commanding officer was forced to admit that he stayed locked in his car and drove off.
Sir Craig Mackey was the man in charge of the Metropolitan Police when a terrorist struck at the heart of Westminster.
1 minute silence to remember Keith and all victims.
But just a week before leading this vigil to the victims, a court heard he was inside a locked car while witnessing the murder of one of his own officers before leaving the scene. He said he saw PC Palmer suffer 2 determined stab wounds before falling to the ground. He managed to get up, though, and staggered right past Sir Craig's car window, followed closely by the attacker, Khalid Masood. Sir Craig told the jury the attack happened just as he was being driven out of the Palace of Westminster after a ministerial meeting. Sir Craig had left that meeting in Parliament by the colonnades to get into his official car. As he was being driven around the courtyard, he said he heard a loud bang and saw Masood enter carrying a butcher's knife. He then witnessed Masood stabbing his officer, PC Keith Palmer. Just seconds later, he heard Masood being shot by an armed officer before his car continued to exit via carriage gates. After hearing those gunshots, Sir Craig told the jury, "First and foremost, I was a police officer, so I went to open the door to get out. One of the PCs quite rightfully said, 'Get out, make safe, go, shut the door.' I had no personal protective equipment, no radio, 2 colleagues with me who were quite traumatised by what they had seen, so we moved out, and I began coordinating the response you saw." After the attack, he went on to receive a knighthood for his services to policing and returned to his role as Deputy Commissioner. He's retiring at the end of this year. Sejal Karia, News at 10.
Some politics now, and we probably all have our own view of Theresa May's shimmy to Dancing Queen last week, ranging from squirming embarrassment to good on her cheerleading. But what looked like a clear attempt to mock her by the President of the Commission, Jean-Claude Juncker, became the talking point today on a day in which Downing Street was heavily playing down the sense that a deal might be close. Just as well, perhaps, because it also emerged that the EU has shelved a plan to outline what its future relationship with Britain might be. I'm joined, of course, by Robert, who is here. Robert, I feel we should just have a look. Can we just have a look at this picture first? Because it really is quite something. He's definitely having a go, isn't he? I mean, we've had the cherry on the cake and everything. What do you make of that?
Well, look, you've got to decide whether you think that is malicious mickey-taking or a little bit of jokey solidarity. Now, look, I've spoken to Downing Street, as you would expect, to see if they're offended, and they say no. They think it's just a bit of fun and they quite like it. So, look, I don't think this is the beginning of World War III with the rest of the EU. I mean, interestingly, you say that Downing Street were playing down the prospect of an imminent deal, but when I talk to ministers and when I talk to EU Commission people, they're all much more optimistic that a deal will be struck, which I don't really understand because the hurdles to a Brexit deal are formidable. She's got to persuade the rest of the EU to let us effectively stay inside the single market for goods, but be outside for services and not have free movement of people. That's something that many EU leaders hate. She's got to persuade her own DUP, the partners in government, the people propping her up from Northern Ireland, that actually having checks on goods going from Great Britain to Northern Ireland to check they meet EU standards, that is something they will accept. She's got to persuade people like David Davis and the true Brexit wing of the Tory party that it would be OK to stay in the customs union in a worst case, if she can't get a long-term deal, forever. Now, these are formidable obstacles. She's got days to get over them. People are telling me there's going to be a Brexit deal. I would not put the prospects of that much higher than 50-50 at the moment.
OK, we will see. But, Robert, for now, thank you very much indeed.